The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone square as Marcus adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. The golden buttons gleamed against the deep blue fabric, each thread woven with the pride of 5 generations of royal guards who had served before him. Today marked his first official duty at the palace gates, a moment he had dreamed of since childhood when his grandfather would tell him stories of honor and sacrifice. Marcus came from a humble background in the village of Millbrook, where his father worked as a blacksmith and his mother tended to their small garden. Money was always tight, but love filled their modest home. When the royal recruitment officers came to their village 3 years ago, Marcus saw an opportunity not just for himself, but for his family. The position of royal guard came with a decent salary and the chance to serve something greater than himself. The training had been brutal. Dawn to dusk drills, weapons practice, etiquette lessons, and countless hours studying royal protocols. Many recruits dropped out, unable to handle the physical and mental demands. But Marcus persevered, driven by the memory of his grandfather's stories and the hope of making his family proud. His grandfather had served as a palace gardener for 40 years and often spoke of the nobility and grace he witnessed within those walls. Now, standing at attention beside the ornate iron gates, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The palace behind him was magnificent, with its towering spires and intricate stonework that had taken master craftsmen decades to complete. Tourists and locals alike would often gather outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty or simply to admire the architectural marvel. Captain Rodriguez, a stern man with salt and pepper hair and 30 years of service, approached with his usual measured steps. His weathered face carried the wisdom of countless experiences, and his eyes held a mixture of authority and kindness that Marcus had come to respect during training. "Remember, son," the captain said in his deep, reassuring voice, "we are the first line of protection for the royal family. Every person who approaches these gates must be treated with respect, but also with caution. Our duty is not just ceremonial. We are the shield that stands between those we serve and any potential threat." Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of his position. He had heard stories from other guards about difficult situations they had faced, from overzealous tourists trying to climb the gates to more serious security concerns that required quick thinking and decisive action. The morning progressed peacefully, with the usual flow of approved visitors, delivery personnel, and staff members entering and exiting the palace grounds. Marcus checked identification cards, verified appointments, and maintained the dignified bearing expected of a royal guard. Each interaction was an opportunity to represent not just himself, but the entire institution he now served. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting a golden glow over the palace courtyard, Marcus noticed a group of young men approaching the gates. They appeared to be in their early 20s, dressed casually but cleanly. At first glance, they seemed like typical tourists interested in seeing the palace up close. However, something in their demeanor caught Marcus's attention. Their movements seemed too purposeful, too coordinated for casual sightseers. The group's leader, a tall young man with confident stride and piercing eyes, stepped forward first. His companions flanked him in a formation that seemed almost military in nature, though they wore no uniforms. Marcus's training kicked in, heightening his awareness while maintaining his professional composure. "Good afternoon," Marcus said politely, his voice steady and clear. "How may I assist you today?" The leader smiled, but there was something unsettling about the expression. It seemed to carry a challenge, as if he were testing Marcus's resolve from the very first moment of their interaction. The other young men exchanged glances that spoke of shared knowledge and purpose. "We're here to see how well the palace is protected," the leader announced boldly, his voice carrying an edge that made Marcus's instincts sharpen. "We've heard that the royal guards are supposed to be the best of the best. We're curious to see if that reputation is deserved." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his exterior remained calm and professional. Years of training had prepared him for unusual situations, though nothing quite like this direct challenge to his authority and competence. He recognized that this moment would test not only his individual skills, but also the entire system of palace security that had been carefully developed over decades. Marcus maintained his professional stance, though every muscle in his body had tensed with alertness. The leader's words echoed in his mind as he quickly assessed the situation. 6 young men now stood before the palace gates, their casual appearance masking what seemed to be a coordinated effort to test or challenge the security measures. "I appreciate your interest in palace security," Marcus replied diplomatically, his voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his veins. "However, I must remind you that this is a restricted area, and any unauthorized testing of security measures is strictly prohibited." The leader laughed, a sound that carried no genuine humor but rather a mocking tone that made Marcus's jaw tighten slightly. The young man stepped closer to the gates, his companions moving in sync behind him like a well-rehearsed dance. Their coordination was too precise to be coincidental, suggesting some level of prior planning or training. "Oh, we're not here to cause any real trouble," the leader said with false sincerity, his eyes scanning the palace grounds beyond the gates with calculating interest. "We just want to see what happens when someone doesn't follow the usual rules. Test the system a little bit." Marcus noticed that one of the young men had begun recording with his phone, while another seemed to be taking photographs of the gate structure and surrounding security features. This behavior immediately raised red flags in Marcus's mind, as photographing security installations was prohibited and could indicate reconnaissance for more serious intentions. "Sir, I need to ask you and your companions to step back from the gates," Marcus said firmly, his training taking over as he moved into a more authoritative posture. "Photography of security installations is not permitted, and I'm going to have to ask you to delete any images you've taken." The leader's expression shifted, his false friendliness evaporating to reveal something harder and more challenging underneath. He crossed his arms and planted his feet more firmly, a clear signal that he had no intention of complying with Marcus's reasonable request. "And what if we don't want to step back?" the leader asked, his voice taking on a provocative edge. "What exactly are you going to do about it? You're just one guard standing at a gate. We're 6 people who think we should be able to stand wherever we want on a public sidewalk." Marcus felt the familiar weight of his grandfather's stories pressing down on him. The old man had always emphasized that being a royal guard meant more than just wearing a uniform. It meant standing firm in the face of challenges, protecting not just the physical safety of the royal family, but also the dignity and respect that the institution represented. The other palace staff and visitors in the area had begun to notice the confrontation developing at the gates. Some stopped to watch from a distance while others hurried past, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus was acutely aware that his handling of this situation would be observed and potentially judged by many people. "I understand your position," Marcus said, keeping his voice level but allowing a note of steel to enter his tone. "However, this is not simply about a public sidewalk. These are the gates to the royal palace, and there are specific laws and regulations governing conduct in this area. I am authorized and required to enforce those regulations." The young man with the phone continued recording, making sure to capture Marcus's words and reactions. The leader noticed this and seemed emboldened by the documentation of their confrontation. "Laws and regulations," the leader repeated mockingly. Big words from someone who probably couldn't handle a real challenge if it came walking up to his precious gates. "I bet if we really wanted to cause problems, there's nothing you could actually do to stop us." Marcus felt a surge of anger at the disrespect, but his training helped him channel that emotion into focused determination rather than rash action. He knew that losing his temper would only escalate the situation and potentially give these young men exactly what they seemed to be looking for. Behind him, Marcus could sense movement within the palace grounds. Other staff members had noticed the commotion, and he knew that word would soon reach his superiors about the developing situation. The thought both comforted and concerned him, as he wanted to handle this professionally without needing immediate backup. The leader took another step closer to the gates, now well within the security perimeter that Marcus was sworn to protect. His companions spread out slightly, creating a semicircle that seemed designed to make Marcus feel surrounded and outnumbered. "Last warning," Marcus said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position. "Step back from the gates immediately, delete any unauthorized photographs and move along. If you refuse to comply, I will be forced to take further action." The leader's smile grew wider, as if Marcus's warning was exactly what he had been hoping to provoke. The afternoon sun caught the gleam in his eyes, revealing an anticipation that suggested this confrontation was unfolding exactly according to some predetermined plan. The tension in the air became almost tangible as the leader deliberately ignored Marcus's warning. Instead of stepping back, He moved even closer to the ornate iron gates, reaching out as if to test the latch mechanism. His companions watched with eager anticipation, their phones now openly recording every moment of the confrontation. Further action, the leader scoffed, his hand now actually touching the gate. What kind of further action could one lonely guard possibly take against all of us? This should be interesting to see. Marcus knew he had reached the point where diplomacy had failed and decisive action was required. His hand moved smoothly to the communication device clipped to his uniform, a movement so practiced and natural that it seemed almost casual. But the young men immediately recognized the significance of the gesture. "Code yellow at main gate," Marcus spoke clearly into his radio, using the established protocol for a potential security breach that required immediate backup. 6 individuals refusing to comply with lawful orders, unauthorized photography of installations, attempted unauthorized access to restricted areas. The leader's confident expression faltered slightly as he heard the professional tone and specific language Marcus used. Perhaps for the first time, he began to realize that this wasn't just some ceremonial guard playing dress-up, but a trained security professional with real authority and resources at his disposal. Within moments, Marcus could hear the sound of approaching footsteps from within the palace grounds. Captain Rodriguez appeared first, his experienced eyes quickly taking in the situation and assessing the threat level. Behind him came 2 additional guards, their movements coordinated and purposeful as they took positions that effectively surrounded the group of young men. "Gentlemen," Captain Rodriguez said in his authoritative voice that had commanded respect for 3 decades, "I am Captain Rodriguez, head of palace security. You are currently in violation of several laws regarding conduct near government installations. I strongly advise you to cooperate with Guard Marcus's instructions." The leader's bravado began to crumble as he found himself facing multiple uniformed officials rather than the single guard he had thought he could intimidate. His companions shuffled nervously, their earlier confidence evaporating as the reality of their situation became clear. "We haven't done anything wrong," the leader protested, though his voice lacked the cocky assurance it had carried just minutes earlier. "We're just standing on a public sidewalk asking questions." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his presence commanding and unmistakable. "Unauthorized photography of security installations, refusal to comply with lawful orders from authorized personnel, and attempted access to restricted areas are all violations of the law. Additionally, your coordinated behavior suggests possible reconnaissance activity, which is a serious matter." Marcus watched as the young men began to understand the gravity of their situation. What had started as what they apparently thought would be a harmless challenge to a single guard had escalated into a legitimate security incident involving multiple law enforcement officials. The sound of additional vehicles could now be heard approaching from the street. Marcus glanced briefly to see 2 police cars pulling up to the curb, their presence adding another layer of official authority to the situation. The officers who emerged were clearly familiar with the palace security team, suggesting regular coordination between different levels of law enforcement. "Look, we didn't mean anything serious by this," one of the companions said nervously, apparently the first to fully grasp that their situation was rapidly moving beyond their control. "We were just, seeing what would happen." Captain Rodriguez's expression remained stern and professional. "Intent is certainly a factor that will be considered, but your actions have created a legitimate security concern that must be addressed according to established protocols." The leader looked around desperately, realizing that his group was now completely outnumbered and surrounded by professional law enforcement personnel. The casual observers who had been watching the confrontation from a distance had been moved back by the arriving officers, creating a secure perimeter around the incident. Marcus felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal relief as he watched the situation being brought under control. His training had served him well, and he had handled the initial challenge exactly as he had been taught. More importantly, he had protected the dignity and security of the institution he had sworn to serve. "We want to cooperate," the leader finally said, his voice now subdued and respectful. "What do you need us to do?" Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly at this change in attitude. "First, you will delete any unauthorized photographs or videos you have taken. Then you will provide identification and submit to questioning about your activities and intentions here today." As the young men began to comply with these instructions, Marcus reflected on how quickly the situation had transformed. What had begun as a seemingly simple challenge to his authority had revealed itself to be a complex test of the entire security system that protected the royal palace and its occupants. As the investigation continued, Marcus learned that the situation was far more complex than it had initially appeared. The police officers, working in coordination with Captain Rodriguez, discovered that the 6 young men were actually university students conducting what they called a social experiment for a project about authority and public response to challenges. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead officer on the scene, questioned each of the students individually while the palace security team maintained their positions. Through these interviews, a clearer picture emerged of what had motivated the confrontation at the gates. According to their statements, Detective Chen explained to Captain Rodriguez and Marcus, they chose the palace gates specifically because they wanted to test how security would respond to a non-violent but persistent challenge. They claimed they were studying power dynamics and authority structures for a sociology class. Marcus listened carefully to this explanation, trying to understand how university students could have been so misguided about the potential consequences of their actions. The leader, who had identified himself as James Patterson, was a third-year sociology student at the local university. His companions were fellow students who had volunteered to participate in what they apparently thought would be a harmless academic exercise. Captain Rodriguez shook his head with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Academic exercise or not, their actions created a legitimate security threat. They photographed sensitive installations, refused to comply with lawful orders, and behaved in a manner consistent with reconnaissance activity. The gravity of the situation became even more apparent when Detective Chen revealed additional information about the students' preparation for their experiment. They had apparently spent weeks researching palace security procedures, studying guard rotations, and even mapping the layout of the surrounding area. This level of preparation goes well beyond casual academic interest, Detective Chen noted. Whether they intended it or not, their activities followed patterns that are consistent with hostile reconnaissance. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized how close the situation had come to being classified as a potential terrorist threat. The students' naive approach to their project had inadvertently mimicked the preliminary activities that actual threats might employ when planning an attack on the palace. James Patterson, now visibly shaken by the seriousness of the situation, was brought forward to speak directly with Captain Rodriguez. The confident young man who had challenged Marcus just an hour earlier now appeared pale and nervous, fully aware that his academic project had spiraled far beyond his control. "Sir, I want to emphasize that we never intended any real threat to the palace or the royal family," James said, his voice trembling slightly. "We were just studying social responses to authority challenges. We thought it would be like questioning a police officer or challenging a security guard at a mall." Captain Rodriguez studied the young man carefully before responding. "Mr. Patterson, the palace is not a mall, and royal guards are not mall security officers. This is a government installation housing the head of state. Your actions, regardless of intent, constituted a serious breach of security protocols. The implications of their actions were further complicated when Detective Chen discovered that the students had posted preliminary information about their planned experiment on social media platforms. These posts, while not specific about their target, had attracted attention from individuals who might have had less innocent motives. The online activity associated with this group has been flagged by our cybersecurity division, Detective Chen reported. While the students themselves appear to have had academic motivations, their public posts attracted interest from some concerning individuals. Marcus began to understand that what had seemed like a simple confrontation with overconfident students was actually part of a much larger security concern. The students' naive social media activity had potentially provided information to people who might have used it for genuinely harmful purposes. The university's involvement in the situation became necessary when it was discovered that no professor had actually assigned this project. The students had apparently conceived and planned the entire exercise on their own, believing it would make an impressive independent study project. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the head of the sociology department, arrived at the scene looking both concerned and bewildered. She spoke with the students and confirmed that their claimed academic project had never been approved or sanctioned by the university. "This type of activity is absolutely not what our department would ever endorse," Dr. Morrison stated firmly. "Our students are taught to conduct research through proper channels and with appropriate permissions. What these students did represents a serious violation of academic ethics and university policies." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus watched the complex web of consequences unfold from what the students had thought would be a simple academic exercise. Their actions had triggered security protocols, involved multiple law enforcement agencies, and created a significant disruption to palace operations. The students were ultimately charged with several misdemeanors related to their unauthorized activities, though the serious terrorism-related charges that might have been filed were dropped due to their apparent lack of malicious intent. However, they still faced university disciplinary actions and the possibility of civil penalties related to the cost of the security response their actions had triggered. Standing at his post as normalcy gradually returned to the palace gates, Marcus reflected on the valuable lesson the incident had provided about the importance of vigilance and proper protocol, even in situations that might initially appear harmless or naive. The aftermath of the incident brought unexpected consequences that extended far beyond the immediate participants. News of the confrontation spread quickly through both traditional media and social platforms, creating a complex narrative about security, academic freedom, and the appropriate use of authority. Marcus found himself at the center of a public discussion he had never anticipated when he put on his uniform that morning. Local news stations picked up the story, portraying it variously as an example of effective security measures, government overreach, or student irresponsibility, depending on their editorial perspective. The palace administration called a meeting the following morning to discuss the incident and its implications. Marcus sat in the ornate conference room alongside Captain Rodriguez and other senior security personnel, listening as officials analyzed every aspect of the previous day's events. Guard Marcus handled the initial confrontation exactly according to protocol. Captain Rodriguez reported to the assembled officials. His recognition of the threat, appropriate escalation procedures, and professional demeanor throughout the incident reflect well on our training programs. The palace's head of security, Director Amanda Walsh, nodded approvingly before addressing the broader implications. However, this incident has highlighted some vulnerabilities in our approach to public engagement and information security that we need to address. Marcus learned that the students' social media activity had indeed attracted attention from intelligence agencies monitoring online discussions about government installations. Their innocent academic project had inadvertently created what analysts called noise in the signal, making it more difficult to identify genuine threats among the background chatter of curious students and academic researchers. The university faced its own reckoning in the days following the incident. Dr. Morrison implemented new policies requiring pre-approval for any student research involving government facilities or security installations. The sociology department also began working with local law enforcement to develop proper channels for legitimate academic research on authority and security topics. James Patterson and his companions found themselves dealing with consequences they had never imagined when they conceived their project. Beyond the legal charges they faced, the incident had created permanent records that would follow them in background checks for future employment, particularly in any security-sensitive positions. Marcus received a commendation from the palace administration for his professional handling of the situation, but he found himself more reflective than celebratory about the recognition. The incident had taught him valuable lessons about the complexity of modern security challenges and the importance of understanding the broader context of seemingly isolated events. The story took an unexpected turn when James Patterson requested a meeting with Marcus several weeks after the incident. Through official channels, he asked for an opportunity to apologize personally and to better understand the perspective of the security personnel he had challenged. Captain Rodriguez initially opposed the meeting, citing security concerns and the precedent it might set. However, after discussion with the palace administration and consultation with the university, they decided that a carefully supervised meeting might serve educational purposes for both parties. The meeting took place in a neutral location, with Captain Rodriguez present, to ensure proper protocols were followed. James appeared genuinely remorseful and eager to understand how his actions had been perceived from Marcus's perspective. "I Realize now that we completely failed to consider the human element of what we were doing, James admitted. We thought about security as an abstract system to be tested, not as people doing a job they take seriously and that has real importance. Marcus found himself unexpectedly moved by the young man's sincerity. He explained how the incident had affected not just him, but the entire security team and their families, who had been concerned about the implications of a potential security breach. When someone challenges palace security, it's not just about following rules, Marcus explained. It's about protecting people we care about and maintaining the stability of institutions that matter to our society. The conversation led to an unexpected outcome when James asked if he could write about the experience from a different perspective, focusing on the human cost of his group's actions rather than the abstract power dynamics they had originally intended to study. With approval from the palace administration and the university, James's revised project became a case study in the ethics of social research and the importance of considering the impact of academic activities on the people and institutions being studied. The incident ultimately led to the development of new guidelines for academic research involving government facilities, creating proper channels for legitimate scholarly inquiry while maintaining necessary security measures. Marcus often reflected on how a single morning's confrontation had evolved into a broader discussion about responsibility, authority, and the complex relationships between academic freedom and public safety. The experience had taught him that being a royal guard involved not just protecting physical security, but also serving as a bridge between the institution he represented and the public it served. 6 months after the incident that had changed his perspective on his role as a royal guard, Marcus stood once again at the palace gates, but now with a deeper understanding of the responsibility he carried. The experience with James Patterson and his companions had become a defining moment in his career, shaping not only his approach to security but also his view of public service. The palace had implemented several changes based on lessons learned from the incident. New training programs now included modules on recognizing and appropriately responding to social media-driven challenges to security. Guards were also given additional education about academic research and the importance of distinguishing between genuine threats and misguided curiosity. Marcus had become something of an unofficial spokesman for these new approaches, sharing his experience with incoming recruits and helping to develop training scenarios based on real-world situations. His calm and professional handling of the confrontation had become a case study in proper security protocols. The relationship between the palace and the local university had also evolved in positive ways. Dr. Morrison had worked with palace officials to establish a formal liaison program, allowing legitimate academic research to proceed through proper channels while maintaining necessary security measures. James Patterson had indeed completed his revised project, which became required reading in the university's research ethics curriculum. His paper, titled The Human Cost of Social Experiments, a personal account of misguided academic inquiry, provided a thoughtful analysis of how academic curiosity must be balanced with respect for the people and institutions being studied. The young man had also begun volunteering with a local community policing initiative, working to build better understanding between law enforcement and university students. His experience at the palace gates had motivated him to pursue a career in conflict resolution and community mediation. Marcus occasionally encountered James at these community events, and their interactions had evolved from formal apologies to genuine conversations about the challenges facing both security personnel and young people trying to understand their place in society. The incident had also attracted the attention of security professionals from other government installations, who visited the palace to learn about the protocols and training that had enabled such an effective response to an unusual situation. Marcus found himself briefing officials from embassies, military bases, and other high-security facilities about the importance of maintaining professionalism, even in confrontational situations. Captain Rodriguez, now nearing retirement, often cited the incident as an example of how proper training and good judgment could turn a potentially negative situation into a learning opportunity for everyone involved. He had recommended Marcus for promotion to senior guard status, recognizing his growth and leadership potential. The broader implications of the incident continued to resonate throughout the security community. The case had been studied by terrorism prevention experts, who noted how the students' innocent research had inadvertently mimicked patterns of hostile reconnaissance. This analysis had led to improved methods for distinguishing between genuine threats and misguided curiosity. Marcus's family had also been affected by the experience and its aftermath. His parents, initially worried about the confrontational nature of the incident, had come to understand the importance of their son's work and the skill he had demonstrated under pressure. His grandfather, now in his 80s, had been particularly proud of how Marcus had upheld the honor of his position while showing appropriate restraint and professionalism. The story had even reached the royal family themselves, who had expressed appreciation for the security team's handling of the situation. A formal commendation had been added to Marcus's personnel file, and he had been invited to attend a special ceremony recognizing outstanding service by palace staff. As Marcus reflected on the events that had transformed a routine day into a career-defining experience, he realized that the incident had taught him valuable lessons about the complexity of modern security challenges. The world had changed since his grandfather's time as a palace gardener, requiring guards to be not just physical protectors but also skilled communicators and thoughtful representatives of the institutions they served. The legacy of that afternoon continued to influence Marcus's approach to his duties. Every interaction with the public became an opportunity to demonstrate the professionalism and integrity that the Royal Guard represented. He had learned that true security came not just from following protocols, but from understanding the human elements that made those protocols necessary. Standing at his post as the sun set over the palace grounds, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction in his chosen career. The challenges he faced were real and meaningful, and the skills he had developed served not just his immediate duties but the broader goal of maintaining trust and respect between the institutions of government and the people they served. The incident with James Patterson and his companions had become more than just a security challenge successfully resolved. It had become a story of growth, understanding, and the possibility of turning conflict into cooperation through professionalism, patience, and genuine human connection.